Mara Holt did not cry when her father told her she had been promised to a mountain man. Crying would have meant surprise. But this was only the last thing a bad winter had taken from her. First the crops. Then the livestock. Then her mother's wedding ring, sold for flour that lasted 3 weeks. Now this. You'll be fed, her father said. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, on the grain of wood he had memorized over 20 years of meals. And I keep the land. The land. 80 acres of frozen earth that had broken his back and his pride. He could not meet her eyes when he said it. Could not watch her face as the words settled like stones in cold water. Mara was 19. Old enough to understand debt. Old enough to know what men did when they had nothing left to bargain with except daughters. She did not ask his name. Did not ask what he looked like or how old he was or if he had been married before. Questions would not change anything. They would only make her father feel worse, and he already looked like a man drowning on dry land. The man arrived before dusk. Rowan Calder. That was the name spoken in town with lowered voices. A trapper who lived above the tree line where the air turned thin and the wolves sang at night. A man who came down from the peaks only to trade pelts and leave before darkness fell. People said he was half wild. Some said dangerous. No one said kind. Mara watched him through the window as he tied his horse outside. Tall. Broad-shouldered. He moved like someone used to being alone, with no wasted motion, no hurry. His coat was worn but well kept. His boots were good leather, dark with weather and age. When he entered the cabin, he did not touch her. Did not look at her long. He removed his hat and laid gold coins on the table, counted them twice with careful fingers, and signed the paper her father pushed toward him. His handwriting was better than expected. Steady. Clear. He spoke only once. Tomorrow morning. Her father nodded. The transaction was complete. They were married the next morning behind Hutchins' storehouse. No music. No flowers. No blessing worth remembering. The preacher spoke fast, stumbling over words he had said 1,000 times before. He would not look at Mara either. No one would. In town, people watched from doorways and windows. Women whispered behind their hands. Men shook their heads and turned away. Someone said she was being sold like cattle. Someone else said she was lucky to be wanted at all, the way things were. Mara wore her mother's gray dress. It was the only one without patches. Rowan stood beside her in silence. When the preacher asked if he took this woman, he said yes. When it was Mara's turn, she said yes because there was nothing else to say. The word came out steady. She would not give them tears. Would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The preacher pronounced them married. Rowan did not kiss her. He nodded once, paid the man, and walked toward his horse. Mara followed. Her father stood in the street, watching. She thought he might speak. Might apologize. Might offer some final word of comfort or regret. He only raised his hand. A brief gesture. Then he turned and walked back toward the land he had traded her to keep. The ride into the mountains began in silence, and the town disappeared behind them like smoke. The ride into the mountains was hard and quiet. Snow still clung to the shaded passes where sunlight never reached. The trail narrowed as they climbed, winding between rocks and pine trees that grew twisted from wind. The air grew thinner. Colder. Mara's hands ached inside her gloves, and her legs cramped from hours in the saddle. Rowan rode ahead. He did not look back to check on her. Did not ask if she needed to rest. But he kept the pace steady, not rushed. When the trail grew steep, he dismounted and led both horses by hand until the ground leveled out again. Mara waited for him to speak. To warn her about what was expected. To threaten her. To claim what he had bought with gold coins and her father's desperation. He did none of it. They stopped once near a creek. Rowan watered the horses and handed her a canteen without a word. She drank. The water was cold enough to hurt her teeth. When she handed it back, their fingers did not touch. She studied him in the fading light. His face was weathered, lined at the eyes from squinting into sun and snow. Somewhere past 30, she guessed. Maybe older. It was hard to tell with men who lived hard lives. His beard was trimmed close. His hands were scarred but clean. He did not look at her the way men in town sometimes did. Did not let his gaze linger or drift. When he glanced her way, it was brief. Practical. The way someone might check the sky for weather. They rode on as dusk settled over the peaks. The cabin appeared just as darkness took hold. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, backed against a rock face that blocked the worst of the wind. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had been there recently, or Rowan had prepared it before coming down to claim his bride. It was larger than she expected. Solid. Built from logs that fit tight together, chinked properly against the cold. A small barn stood nearby for the horses. Firewood was stacked under a shelter, dry and neatly split. This was not the lair of a wild man. This was the work of someone who planned ahead. Who valued order. Rowan dismounted and tied the horses. He took her bag from the saddle and carried it inside. Mara followed, her legs unsteady after hours of riding. The inside was simple but clean. A stone fireplace. A table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined with supplies, tools, and books. More books than she had expected. Their spines were worn, pages softened from use. A man who read was not the kind of man the town had described. Rowan set her bag down and walked to the far wall. He gestured toward a narrow bed with a wooden frame and a thin mattress. "You'll sleep here," he said. His own bed was on the opposite side of the room. Separate. Distinct. A blanket lay folded at the foot of hers, clean and waiting. He stepped back, putting distance between them. "You'll eat when you're hungry," he continued. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "Work when you can. No one will force you here." Mara stared at him. She had prepared herself for violence. For demands. For the brutal claim that women whispered about when men were not listening. This was worse somehow. This uncertainty. This is waiting for the other boot to drop. Rowan turned toward the door. "I'll see to the horses," he said. Then he left her alone in the cabin with her fear and her questions and the silence that pressed in from all sides. That night, cold crept through the walls like something living. Mara lay on the narrow bed, wrapped in the blanket Rowan had left for her. It smelled clean. Faintly of pine and wood smoke. She kept her clothes on, boots within reach. Her body stayed rigid, listening. She listened for footsteps. For the creak of floorboards. For the sound of him crossing the room in darkness. The sounds never came. Rowan returned from the barn and moved about the cabin with quiet purpose. She heard him banking the fire. Heard water poured into a basin. Heard him settle into his own bed on the far side of the room. Then silence. Mara's eyes stayed open until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Even then, sleep was shallow and scary. She woke twice in the night, heart pounding, certain something had changed. But Rowan remained where he was, breathing steady and slow. Morning came gray and cold. She woke to find him already gone. The fire had been built up. A pot of coffee sat warming on the stones. Bread and dried meat were laid out on the table. Mara rose slowly, muscles aching from the long ride and the tension she had carried through the night. She poured coffee into a tin cup and drank it black. It was strong and bitter and helped push back the fog in her head. The cabin looked different in daylight. Everything had its place. Tools hung on the walls, each one cleaned and oiled. The floor was swept. The windows, though small, were clean enough to let in what light the gray sky offered. She found a water bucket by the door and a path worn to the creek. She washed her face in water so cold it made her gasp. When she returned, Rowan was still gone. Days passed like this. Rowan rose before the first light and returned after dark. He checked his trap lines. Hunted. Repaired things that needed mending. He spoke only what was needed. Where the salt was kept. How to work the latch on the barn door. When to expect him back. He never raised his voice. Never entered her space without warning. When he came inside, he paused at the threshold, giving her time to see him, to know he was there. When storms rolled down from the peaks, he stacked firewood closer to her door without being asked. When her hands cracked and bled from washing in frigid water, a tin of salve appeared on the shelf beside her bed. No words. No explanation. Mara did not know what to make of it. She had been raised on stories of men who took what they wanted. Men who saw wives as property, no different from livestock or land. Her own father had proven that true enough. But Rowan moved through the cabin like a ghost. Present but never imposing. He ate his meals in silence, reading by firelight after. His fingers traced the words carefully, as if each one mattered. Sometimes his lips moved slightly as he read. A man teaching himself. A man who valued knowledge. She began to notice other things. The way he turned his back when she changed clothes. The way he waited for her to speak first before responding. The way he never stood between her and the door. These were not the actions of a man who saw her as something owned. But they were not the actions of a man who cared for her either. They were the actions of someone keeping a promise. An obligation fulfilled with precision and distance. Mara did not know which possibility frightened her more. Trust did not arrive suddenly. It crept in with routine. With the rhythm of days that followed the same quiet pattern. Breakfast at dawn. Work through the day. Meals shared in silence. Evenings by firelight. Rowan began to speak more, though never much. He told her where the medical supplies were kept. Showed her how to bar the door if he was gone overnight. Explained which plants near the creek were safe to gather and which would make her sick. He taught her practical things. Survival things. Not how to please him or serve him, but how to endure if something happened to him. As if he expected she might need to carry on alone. Mara found herself watching him when he did not notice. The way he moved with purpose, never rushed. The way he handled his rifle with respect, not swagger. The way he read those worn books like they were letters from old friends. One evening, she asked about them. Where did you get so many books? Rowan looked up from the page, surprised by the question. It was the first time she had spoken to him beyond necessity. Traded for them, he said. Over the years. Man down in Silver Creek had a whole collection. His widow did not want them after he passed. You read them all? Most. Some twice. He returned to his reading, but something had shifted. A small door had opened. The next night, he left one on the table near her bed. A collection of poems. The pages were soft as cloth from handling. If you want, he said, then moved back to his side of the room. Mara read by candlelight until her eyes grew heavy. The words were strange and beautiful. They spoke of oceans she had never seen and cities that existed only in imagination. When she finally slept, it was deeper than before. Winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains. Snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and hard earth. The creek ran louder with runoff. Birds returned to the high pines, and their songs filled the mornings. One night, a wolf circled the clearing. Mara heard it first. A low sound between a growl and a howl. She sat up in bed, heart hammering. Rowan was already moving. He took his rifle from the wall and went to the door. She watched him step outside into the moonlight. The wolf stood at the edge of the trees, eyes reflecting silver. It was huge, lean from a hard winter. Hungry. Rowan raised the rifle but did not aim. He stood there, still and solid, the weapon lowered but ready. Waiting. The wolf watched him. Minutes passed. The animal shifted its weight, considering. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness. Rowan came back inside. He locked the door and returned the rifle to its place. "You did not shoot," Mara said. "No need. It could come back. It will. But not tonight." He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since their wedding day. "Fear makes fools of men," he said quietly. "So does pride." That animal was not looking for a fight. Just testing boundaries. Same as anything else in these mountains. Mara understood he was not only talking about the wolf. She understood that he had been giving her space to test her own boundaries. To see that he would not cross them. To learn that the walls he kept between them were not traps but protection. "Thank you," she said. "For the book." Rowan nodded once. Something like relief crossed his weathered face. "There are more, if you want them." "I do." That night, she slept without fear for the first time since leaving town. Trouble followed the thaw like a shadow. First, it was the mountain cat. Rowan found 2 of his traps destroyed, the bait taken, claw marks raked deep into the wood. He came back to the cabin earlier than usual, jaw tight with concern. "Big cat," he said. "Hungry. Territorial." He started carrying the rifle everywhere, even to the creek. At night, he slept lighter, waking at sounds Mara could not hear. The animal never showed itself, but its presence hung over the clearing like smoke. Then the townspeople came. 3 men on horseback, riding up the mountain trail without invitation. Mara saw them first from the window. She recognized one of them. Samuel Griffith, who owned the land next to her father's. A man with a reputation for taking what he believed he was owed. Rowan stepped outside before they could dismount. He did not bring the rifle, but Mara knew where it was. Leaning just inside the door, within reach. "Calder," Griffith said, staying in his saddle. "We came to check on the girl." "She has a name," Rowan replied. "Mara Holt, then." "People in town are concerned." "About what?" "About whether she came up here willingly. About whether she stays willing." The other 2 men shifted in their saddles, hands resting near their belts. They were armed. They wanted Rowan to see it. "Ask her yourself," Rowan said, stepping aside. Mara came to the doorway. She had not been told to. Had not been asked. But she would not let these men speak about her as if she were absent. "I am fine," she said clearly. Griffith looked her over like livestock at auction. "You do not look fine. You look thin. Tired. Winter was hard for everyone. You can come back to town. No one would fault you. Your father would take you in." The lie sat heavy in the air. Her father had barely looked at her before selling her away. He would not want her back now, a reminder of his shame. "I stay here," Mara said. "If he is forcing you to say that." "No one forces me to say anything." Griffith's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward in his saddle. "People talk, Mara. They say he has you under some kind of spell. Say you have not been seen in months. Say he keeps you up here like a prisoner." Rowan's voice cut through. "You came up here to gossip like old women? Or did you have a real reason?" One of the other men spoke up. "We have a right to make sure no laws are being broken." "What law?" Rowan asked. "We are legally married. She stays by choice. If that troubles you," the problem is yours, not ours." The men exchanged glances. They had come expecting something different. A frightened woman. A violent man. Evidence of wrongdoing they could carry back to town like a prize. Instead, they found a woman who spoke for herself and a man who let her. Griffith pulled his reins tight. "We will be watching, Calder. If anything happens to her." "Nothing will happen to her here," Rowan said. "More than I can say for town." The words hung in the cold air. A challenge and a truth. The men rode away angry, their purpose unfulfilled. Mara watched them disappear down the trail. Her hands were shaking, though she tried to hide it. "They will come back," she said quietly. "I know. They want a reason to call you a criminal. To call me a victim." Rowan turned to look at her. "Are you?" "No." "Then they will find no reason." But Mara knew better. Men like Griffith did not need reasons. They made them. The whispers grew louder after the visit. When Mara went down to town for supplies the following week, the stares followed her like flies. Women pulled their children closer as she passed. Men watched from doorways, their faces hard with judgment or something worse. At the general store, the clerk took her money but did not speak. Did not ask how she was or comment on the weather. Just counted out her change in silence and turned away. Outside, she heard the word. Whispered but meant to carry. Bewitched. As if she had no mind of her own. As if the only explanation for staying with Rowan was dark magic or force. They could not imagine a woman choosing a life away from their rules and their watching eyes. Someone else said cursed. Another said it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened up on that mountain. Mara loaded her supplies and left. She did not give them the satisfaction of anger or tears. But the words followed her up the trail like poison. That night, she told Rowan what she had heard. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable in the firelight. "They need a story," he said finally. "Something to make sense of what frightens them. A woman who chooses differently. A man who lives apart. It threatens their order. They think you have done something to me. I know. Does it not bother you?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "I stopped caring about what the town thinks years ago. But I care what you think." Mara met his eyes across the room. "I think they are afraid of what they do not understand." "Then we are the same," he said. "Because I do not understand them either." Spring deepened into early summer. The mountain cat finally showed itself one morning while Rowan was checking the far trap line. Mara was alone at the cabin when she heard the horses screaming in the barn. She grabbed the rifle from the wall. Her hands remembered what Rowan had taught her in quiet moments. How to hold it. How to breathe. How to aim without panic. The cat was at the barn door, muscles bunched, ready to force its way inside. It was massive, scarred from old fights, desperate enough to hunt in daylight. Mara did not shoot. She remembered what Rowan had said about the wolf. About fear and pride. She fired into the ground near the cat's front paws. The crack of the rifle echoed off the rock face. The animal spun, hissing, and saw her standing in the cabin doorway. She worked the lever action. Chambered another round. Raised the rifle again. The cat's ears flattened. It measured the distance between them. Measured the threat. Mara held steady. Did not advance. Did not retreat. The standoff lasted seconds that felt like hours. Then the cat turned and vanished into the trees. When Rowan returned an hour later, he found Mara sitting on the porch steps, rifle across her knees, hands still shaking. "I heard the shot," he said. She told him what happened. He listened, then checked the barn. The horses were rattled but unharmed. He sat down beside her on the steps. "You did right," he said. "You could have killed it. But you gave it a choice. Like you gave me, Mara said quietly. Rowan looked at her. I never gave you anything. You were taken from your home. Sold like property. That was not my doing, but I was part of it. You could have made it worse. That is not the same as making it right. Mara turned to face him fully. Why did you agree to it? To the marriage? The question had lived between them for months, unspoken. Rowan looked out at the mountains, at the peaks that held their secrets close. Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old knowledge. I knew what would happen to you if I did not. Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. What do you mean? There are camps, he said. Up in the high country. Mining camps. Logging camps. Places where men outnumber women 50-1. Places where desperation turns men into something worse than animals. He looked at his hands, scarred and weathered. Your father owed money to more than just the bank. He owed men who do not forgive debts. Men who would have taken you as payment if I had not offered gold first. The truth landed like a stone in dark water. You knew this, Mara said. Before you came to our cabin. I heard talk in town. Heard your name mentioned. Heard what was being planned. He paused. I have seen what happens in those camps. Seen women broken by it. Seen men lose whatever piece of soul they had left. I could not let that be your fate. So you bought me instead. I gave you a door, Rowan said. You chose to walk through it. Every day you stay, that is your choice. The door is never locked. Mara's throat tightened. All this time, she had thought herself a victim of circumstance. A woman with no options. But Rowan had given her the only option that mattered. Safety. Space. Time to decide what she wanted. Why did you never tell me? Because it was not my story to use. Not my suffering to claim. I did what needed to be done. That is all. They sat in silence as the sun dropped behind the western peaks. The air grew cold. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, sharp and clear. Thank you, Mara said finally. Rowan shook his head. Do not thank me for basic decency. That is what they should have given you from the start. But Mara understood now. Understood why he kept his distance. Why did he never demand it? Why did he treat her like a person instead of property? It was not cold. It was respect. The kind of respect she had never been shown in town, where her value was measured in what she could provide to men. The peace did not last. They came for her 3 nights later. Rowan had gone down to check the southern trap line, planning to return before dark. But the trail had been damaged by recent rains, and he was delayed. Mara was alone when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 4 men. Not the same ones as before. These were rougher. Harder. Men with faces she recognized from the edges of town. The kind who spent their days drinking and their nights looking for trouble. She barred the door. Loaded the rifle. Her hands shook but held steady. They did not knock. One of them kicked at the door while the others shouted. Come out, girl. We are taking you back where you belong. You have no right, Mara called back. Your father sent us. Says you have been brainwashed. Says that mountain man has you under his spell. Another lie. Her father would never send men like these. Leave now, she said. I am armed. They laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Put the rifle down before someone gets hurt. We are here to save you. The door shuddered under another kick. The bar held, but barely. Mara aimed at the door, finger on the trigger, heart hammering against her ribs. Then she heard it. A sound that made the men outside go quiet. Footsteps. steady and deliberate. Coming up the trail in the darkness. Rowan stepped into the clearing. He carried no rifle. No weapon visible. Just a man walking toward 4 armed men with the same steady pace he used for everything else. The men turned. Hands moved toward gun belts. "That is far enough, Calder," one of them said. "We are taking her back to town." Rowan kept walking. He stopped 10 feet away. Close enough to be heard. Far enough to be clear. "No," he said simply. "Your wife is coming with us. Her father wants her home. She has no home in town. She has one here. That is not for you to decide. It is not for you either." One of the men drew his pistol. Pointed it at Rowan's chest. "Last chance. Step aside or we will move you aside." Rowan did not flinch. Did not raise his hands. He stood there like a mountain himself, immovable and ancient. "You can shoot me," he said quietly. "Then you will have to explain to the law why you killed an unarmed man on his own property. You will have to explain to the town why you broke down a door and dragged a woman away against her will." He took 1 step forward. The man with the gun tensed. "Or you can leave now," Rowan continued. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled from. Tell whoever sent you that Mara Calder stays where she chooses to stay." The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Inside the cabin, Mara held her breath. She had the rifle trained on the window, ready to fire if they shot Rowan. But she understood what he was doing. He was giving them a way out. A chance to leave without violence. Without blood that could not be taken back. The man with the gun looked at his companions. They looked at Rowan. At his stillness. At the certainty in his stance. Something in that stillness told them there would be no second warning. That if they crossed this line, there would be consequences that gold and connections could not erase. The gun lowered. "This is not over," the man said. "Yes," Rowan replied. "It is." The men mounted their horses. They rode away into darkness, muttering curses and threats that faded with distance. Rowan waited until the sound of hooves disappeared completely. Then he came to the cabin door. "It's me," he said. Mara unbarred the door. He stepped inside. She saw then that his hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the effort of holding himself back. Of choosing control over violence. "You could have been killed," she said. "So could you." They had guns. Scared men with guns are more dangerous than calm men without. He looked at her. "Are you hurt?" "No." He nodded and moved to check the door, to make sure it was secure. His movements were automatic, necessary, something to do with the adrenaline still moving through him. Mara set the rifle down. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. "Rowan." He stopped. Looked at her. "Marry me," she said. He blinked. "We are already married." "No." That was a transaction. A piece of paper signed behind a building while people whispered and judged. "I want to marry you. Here. Now." With words that mean something. Rowan was silent. She saw something break open in his face. Some wall he had kept carefully maintained. "You are certain," he said. "I have never been more certain of anything." They stood facing each other in the cabin they had shared for months. No preacher. No witnesses. Just 2 people who had learned what it meant to choose each other freely. "I take you as my husband," Mara said. "Not because I was forced. Not because I had no choice. But because you gave me choices and respected every one. Because you made this mountain a place I could stand on my own." Rowan's voice was rough when he spoke. "I take you as my wife. Not because I bought you. But because you stayed when you could have left. Because you are stronger than any mountain I have ever climbed." No kiss followed. No grand gesture. Just a quiet understanding that the vows spoken in firelight meant more than any paper or law. Years passed. The cabin grew. A child's laughter filled the spaces once ruled by wind and silence. Then another child. The sound of small feet running across wooden floors. The sound of life taking root in hard soil. The town softened. Not with apologies. Those never came. But with silence that eventually turned to grudging acceptance. People stopped whispering when Mara came down for supplies. Stopped watching her like she might break or run. They saw her with her children. Saw the way she carried herself. Saw the quiet strength that came from choosing her own path instead of walking one laid out by others. No one envied the mountain man's wife anymore. They understood too late what she had known all along. She had not been taken. She had not been stolen or bewitched or trapped. She had been given a place to stand. And a man who never tried to own her. In the end, that made all the difference. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold tales from the Wild West. Drop a comment below and tell us what you thought about Mara and Rowan's journey. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.